Hi, everyone. Thrilled to have everyone here to talk about securing multi-cloud security practices and securing multi-cloud environments. I'm Bill Hall. I'm a director with PwC, and I drive the Microsoft CR&R Alliance, which is our Cyber Risk and Regulatory Alliance. I'll be moderating this discussion. I'd like to introduce everyone else here on this call. Brian, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So I'm Brian Stockberger. I am a security architect with Microsoft, supporting our great partner community like PwC.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, I'm Nidhu Nalan. I'm part of PwC Cyber Risk and Regulatory Practice. I have about 15 years of business transformation experience. I specialize in cloud security. I'm really excited for today and for the content we have prepared for you folks today. And we are hoping for this session to be interactive. So keep those questions coming. With that, I will pass it over to Rob.
Yeah, so good afternoon or good morning or good evening if you're watching this on repeat. So my name is Robert Daniels, and I am the Microsoft Cyber Defense and Engineering driver for PwC. So what this means is I work alongside with Nidhu in developing our solutions around Microsoft, and I'm an integral part of the Microsoft Alliance with Bill to enable those solutions to drive our relationship and our opportunities with Microsoft.
Thanks, Rob. Glad to have everyone here and glad to have such a great conversation here around securing multi-cloud environments. Some of you may have heard about PwC, some of you may not. Rob, do you want to just talk a little bit more about who we are?
Sure. So many of you will have heard about PwC, but maybe not realize our scale and scope. So we have approximately 300,000 employees across 152 countries. Now, we are a network of firms. That enables us to work seamlessly together when it comes to sharing resources and exchanging ideas. But at the same time, because we are a network, we are able to adapt our offerings and our talent to the local market.
Thanks, Rob. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to walk through a conversation here around securing multi-cloud environments. We, PwC, have a long-standing alliance with Microsoft, and we are and have been a member of MISA for a number of years. We have thousands of consultants that are Microsoft certified and have all the security specializations that Microsoft offers. In addition to the verified solution, MXDR verified solution, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Today, we're going to walk through trends towards multi-cloud, considerations when securing multi-cloud, and what a typical example looks like, along with the benefits of our alliance and the work that we've been able to drive together. Continuing on with the discussion, I'd like to turn to Nidhu to talk to us a little bit about multi-cloud architectures and some of the trends that we're seeing.
Thank you, Bill. So I think most of the folks here on the call and do understand what cloud is. But what is multi-cloud? It's an extension of it. So I think let's start with establishing that baseline. Multi-cloud architecture is when an organization consumes services from or leverages two or more cloud service providers, potentially as an extension to their hybrid infrastructure. Now, this is a very increasing trend we are noticing with a lot of our clients. The organizations, if not all, almost all of them are into the multi-cloud adoption journey. And so it is important to understand how we can develop an approach where we can consistently and uniformly build a secure and a compliant multi-cloud architecture.
You know, the adoption of a multi-cloud is really rapidly increasing amongst our clients. Nidhu, what do you think is driving this?
So I think some of the key things is that the benefits that comes with it. Now, multi-cloud itself, inherently comes with all the benefits you get out of cloud adoption. You can scale up, scale down as your business priorities shift. It's much easier to do that in a cloud environment versus a traditional on-premises environment. In a traditional on-premises environment, the client or the organization is 100% responsible for the upkeep of that environment. Now, when we talk about a multi-cloud environment or any cloud environment, some of that responsibility is shared. So a lot of that overhead is transitioned from the organization to the cloud service provider, and now they can use that time and money to focus on their business priorities. So definitely like scalability and agility is one of the top things, which acts as a driver for multi-cloud adoption.
I mean, that's really true. It also allows organizations to potentially optimize IT spending, especially if you take a more holistic look across your cloud environments. That could reveal opportunities to remove overlapping capabilities, as well as decrease operational complexity across all the cloud security service providers that you're using. This has the potential to deliver real cost savings for organizations.
Yeah, and adding to your point, Rob, I think, cloud service providers like Microsoft and our service around Azure, we're constantly investing in developing new products and new services. And so organizations are, using a multi-cloud environment that really helps them enable to, and leverage the multitude of technologies as they merge to really improve on their own solutions and offerings, without being really limited to the choice around a single cloud provider, right? Every organization has kind of their own reasons for selecting a cloud provider. So back to securing multi-cloud, securing multi-cloud is becoming critical for organizations as they adopt this multi-cloud strategy. They need to be able to have a uniform governance of all of these cloud environments as they're building out their multi-cloud strategy.
That's a great point, Brian. 100% agree with it. And I think another advantage I do want to highlight here is that it prevents vendor lock-in. What does that mean? You are not solely dependent on the services and provided by one cloud service provider, which gives your business a lot of flexibility to adapt and work with a cloud service provider which best fits your needs. So that's definitely like one of the key advantage of multi-cloud architecture.
Yeah, and just to give you a little bit more context on the trends that we're seeing in the industry, we've run a number of digital trust insights reports and other surveys, and a couple of key highlights. So first of all, 48% of organizations have made a deliberate adoption of a multi-cloud approach, leveraging multiple cloud services providers. And I mentioned the word deliberate because I bet you there's a heck of a lot more that are using multi-clouds but don't even realize that they're using them. What I think is very encouraging is that 74% of business leaders are involved in this cloud strategy to encourage growth and innovation. It's not just a technology approach. But a little bit more worrying, but frankly not all that surprising, is that 81% of those surveyed are actually, they have some real concerns around the security around this multi-cloud approach. Neetu, can you provide a little bit more insight in terms of what some of the concerns we're seeing from our clients?
Yep, definitely. So now we have noticed organizations struggling with like enabling security across like cloud service providers, and that concern or that struggle is amplified when we talk about multi-cloud environment. So one of the biggest thing here is that some of the underlying security concerns would still remain the same. Like for example, how do you make sure the right people have access to the right environment, right applications, right data? How do you make sure that your data is protected, whether it's being used, whether it's at rest, whether it's in transmit? And how do you make sure that you are able to identify vulnerabilities or risks in your environment in a timely manner and respond to it? Now, so the same concerns apply in multi-cloud, but one additional element of multi-cloud, which is a very big concern, is how do you now do all of this uniformly and consistently across all of your cloud service providers? That's the very big shift when we talk about multi-cloud environment. How do you make sure that you have a centralized view of risks in all of your environment? You are identifying your vulnerabilities in all of your environments and responding and reacting to them in a consistent manner. If I am not, as a role in my organization, if I should not have access to sensitive personal information, I should not have access to it regardless of where that information or what cloud service provider I'm using, right? So that's where like there's an added complexity to ensure that, okay, whatever I'm doing, my multi-cloud environment has to stay consistently secure and compliant.
No, absolutely. So these are some real important concerns to consider. So I kind of want to ask both you, Neetu, as well as Brian, what are some of the key security domains that an organization should be looking at when they're considering their multi-cloud security strategy?
Yep. So I think, so regardless of, so one of the things, like before we get into the details of it, is that regardless of the environment is multi-cloud, single cloud, hybrid, it doesn't matter. Like these are core security domains, which are going to be critical in ensuring that your environment is secure. So some of the elements of that is, the first thing is identity and access management. How are you making sure the right people have the right level of access to the applications and the data to continue doing their business function, continue doing the work that they do on a daily basis, and do not open yourself up for additional risks. This is where IAM, or identity access management, becomes very critical. So you have to ensure that you are managing the accesses and roles consistently across all the cloud service providers by incorporating the foundational elements of an effective IAM program. For example, principle of least privilege, segregation of duties, reducing instances where you have excessive access or even limited access in some cases. So that's the first core security domain. Now, moving on, we talked about, like, as you think about operating in these multiple environments, you have to be very cognizant of any kind of misconfigurations, because those can introduce very big vulnerabilities in your environment, and you can open yourself up for risks of unauthorized data exposure. So this is where, like, cloud security posture management comes into play, where a service organization needs to think about a service of identifying these misconfigurations across these different environments and reacting and responding to them in a timely manner to ensure that they are appropriately mitigated. And then the third aspect is the cloud workload protection. This is where you need to make sure that your workload is not only secure during its runtime, but throughout the CI/CD pipeline to ensure secure development and operations. So that's also like one critical aspect of this, one of, enabling security in your environment. So with that, I'll pass it over to Brian to cover the remaining domains.
Yeah, thanks, Neetu. So kind of adding to those key areas that Neetu highlighted. So threat and vulnerability management, that's critical, right? So this is really about reducing risk by identifying and prioritizing, vulnerabilities and the risks that they pose to organizations, right? So, things like leveraging, your SIM/SOAR and a vulnerability management technologies to be able to provide that threat detection capabilities kind of in your cloud environments and really defend against those malicious activity and reduce that risk to the organization by, clearly identifying vulnerabilities and prioritizing those, as well as being able to monitor the risk that these vulnerabilities may serve. So when it comes to data security, organizations should really be considering, what type of sensitive data is present, right? Having that level of visibility into data. What is the sensitivity of the data? Where does it exist and where does it live? And then from there, being able to implement data loss protections, really to control that data wherever it lives across all cloud workloads, whether it's in structured or unstructured data, right? So being able to provide that consistent viewpoint across data. And then lastly, for application security, right? Organizations should really focus on implementing these security measures to be able to detect, an example would be, detect and block things like incoming malicious web requests to applications, for each of their cloud environments, and really prioritizing application security across all applications, across their multi-cloud environments.
This is a great framework that organizations can use to structure their approach to multi-cloud security. But many organizations can't do it alone, and they turn to people like us to help them out. So, Neetu, how would we apply this framework in how we engage with our clients?
Yep, great point. So I think so we do have a multi-cloud security service offering, and our security offering enables organization to build and implement an environment which is secure and compliant. And the way we do it is that it's a three-step approach. So the first one is to understand the lay of the land. So understand and assess your current security posture, understand your current cloud security risks. So this is where like we would rely on some Microsoft technologies as well to understand some of the risks present in the environment. So once we have an understanding of that, the second step is that what is the overarching strategy? What's that target state you are planning to achieve with the multi-cloud adoption? Why are you adopting multi-cloud? What kind of services you're planning to leverage? Because a lot of that is going to govern the type and the effectiveness of security controls you need in this environment. So that's what the second focus of this approach is, how we're going to help define a multi-cloud strategy. And also, how are you going to govern this environment? How do you make sure that this is consistently and uniformly applied across and maintained? So that's an aspect of this. And then the last is where now we understand your current state. We understand where you want to be. How do we get there? So this is where we heavily rely on the Microsoft multi-cloud security offerings and solutions to help implement those multi-cloud security capabilities. Like, for example, we talked about misconfigurations. This is where we would rely on something like Microsoft Defender for Cloud to do a scan and understand what kind of misconfigurations are present in the environment and remediate them. So just to summarize, understand the current state, what your existing risks are, and what are the new risks you will be exposed to as you continue with the adoption. Second, what's your overarching strategy and the governance around it? And the third is that actually enabling those security capabilities to meet the objectives of your multi-cloud security strategy.
Thanks, Nadu. We've heard a lot about our approach, PwC's approach, and also where some of the challenges are and key domains for teams to focus on. Brian, would you like to talk a little bit about Microsoft Defender for Cloud?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Bill. So, Defender for Cloud, right, it really provides a number of core capabilities. And, you do kind of touched on a couple of them, but, really first is around cloud security posture management and really being able to gain that visibility into the overall security posture of your cloud environment, right? So being able to, scan and assess and identify what current, kind of security controls based upon the workloads that are deployed, as well as the framework that are being, leveraged, right? So within Defender for Cloud, you can, use different frameworks that your organization might be bound by, things like, based around the NIST framework and PCI, et cetera. And so, organizations can kind of see which workloads are being used, be able to view based upon these frameworks, if security controls have been enforced, and then provide recommendations to be able to take steps to remediate these controls that may have been missed, right? So being able to identify and then take action around the overall security posture. So, and this is all done in, real time and ongoing assessments. So in addition, equally important is the ability to identify, security alerts and these security risks that may be generated against your cloud environments that's being monitored, and being able to trigger and provide visibility to security teams with built-in orchestration and automation to be able to, take action on these alerts, and, whether it's manually or automatically. So that all kind of falls within, identifying the security posture, detecting threats, being able to protect your workloads with that comprehensive workload protection. You touched on this already a little bit. Looking at different workloads that are being leveraged, whether it's, servers and VMs or containers, databases, storage, et cetera, and then building into these different workloads the unification of the DevOps security. One of the critical components of a multi-cloud strategy is being able to, unify the DevOps experience across these multi-cloud platforms instead of kind of managing, within silos. And then, so that is becoming increasingly critical. And then, automating with additional tools, things like your SIM in Sentinel, or a service management solution like ServiceNow, or something to that effect. But being able to do this across your entire cloud platform, not just Azure, but the other cloud providers and on premises that your organizations are using, right? So Defender for Cloud kind of provides that overarching management and visibility into the entire cloud ecosystem that an organization would be leveraging. So Nidu, can you provide some more detail on how they might use Defender for Cloud in action?
Yep, definitely. So what we heard right now was try and go through the capabilities of what the platform has to offer. So now what we're going to get into is like what kind of scenarios or challenges the clients are facing where we can leverage these capabilities. So what are some, and this represents some of the common themes we've been hearing, listening, or experiencing. So typically, what one of the most common things we hear these days is that there are some gaps related to securing their data in the cloud environment. And now that gaps can be identified by an internal function, audit function, or maybe an external regulatory body. So the driver could be different, or it could be self-identified, or it could just be like an anxiety even before getting to the cloud to making sure that, hey, is my data going to be protected once it's there? Or once it's there, does it mean that anybody can get it easily? So that's one very common challenge we keep hearing and experiencing. And there are more specifically, if you get drilled down into that, now what does that mean? So essentially what it means is that as the data is moved from on-premises to cloud, there is a risk that, okay, now how do I make sure that this data is not exposed in an unauthorized manner, intentionally or unintentionally? How do I implement some reactive and proactive controls to prevent this from happening? And then the other aspect, which we touched on a little bit earlier, was that how do you make sure that you have a unified approach to manage this risk across several service providers? So this is what the multi-cloud concern was we were talking about. How do you make sure that you're not identifying and mitigating this in one, but in all the cloud service providers, and you're governing it in a consistent manner? So the solution approach includes two focuses. The first is stop the bleeding. So essentially, this is where we would identify what are some immediate gaps to the environment and implement some tactical solutions to prevent that gap from being exploited further. So these are immediate danger items. So for example, we may implement an additional policy. For example, there is a scenario where user is able to access a SaaS application and download some data to their unmanaged device, for example. Now, how do you go about it? That's an immediate risk item, and maybe they had a couple of instances where this happened. This is where we will leverage technology like Defender for Cloud applications to implement appropriate policies, control access policies, data sharing policies to prevent that from happening. That's an example. The other one is introducing controls like file integrity monitoring, using solution we just covered like Defender for Cloud to make sure that there is no unauthorized or unintentional update of the file, which can compromise the integrity of the data you have. So that's the first solution focus. Then the second focus is prevent this from happening. This is where we talk about more strategic things, long-term things. How do we make sure this doesn't happen in the environment again? So there are two aspects of this. One is, how do we define or design a cloud security architecture to define what are some of the baseline requirements which will apply to all the environments, plus some additional requirements specific to the use of that environment. So maybe you have one CSP where you have all of your sensitive data. You will have some additional requirements. The effectiveness of those security controls are going to be different. And then you may have an analytics environment where you just have company data, but may not have sensitive data as the same level as this other CSP. So some baseline controls will still apply, like IAM controls, logging monitoring, but at the same time, the effectiveness of some controls can vary a little bit between the two. So how do you define that architecture? So that's one thing. Then the other aspect is that we talked about defining a target operating model. what is this target operating model of all of these different cloud service providers? How is all of this going to work together? How are you going to determine the risk? How are you going to react to the risk? What controls? How are you going to enable? What is the effectiveness of controls? And how do you make sure that these controls are in place today and they are designed and operating effectively? So that's the second aspect of the solution. And the business impact of that is that they can address any of their immediate risk items and prevent further exploitation of that. And the second piece is they will walk away with a strategy and an approach which will prevent this from happening in the future. So that's an example.
I was just going to say, sorry for talking over you, but I love this example. And I think this would apply to so many clients, particularly those in regulated industries, but not just necessarily. Now, The one thing, though, is that, we've talked a lot about Defender for Cloud. We've actually talked a little bit about some of the other Microsoft solutions that could be part of this architecture. But certainly, Microsoft has been investing in multi-cloud for many years. And there are other tools beyond Defender for Cloud that are worth highlighting that could help in a multi-cloud architecture. Brian, can you talk a bit more about some of those other tools?
Sure, Rob. Yeah. So, providing protections against servers, whether they're running or services running native in Azure or on-prem or some other cloud, is really, conveniently available in Defender for Servers, right? Which is a component of the Microsoft Defender for Cloud suite. So if servers are running outside of Azure, then using Azure Arc can extend that management and policy to these servers as if they're native to Azure, right? So, these servers can be easily integrated within Defender for Servers to be able to provide that, security posture assessment that we talked about earlier, vulnerability management, workload protection, endpoint detection and response with Defender for Endpoint, and full integration to be able to view, prioritize, and remediate these security alerts and incidents that extend to non-Azure server infrastructure. So Azure Arc is critical to being able to, manage, control policy, manage risk, apply policy as if it's running, native into Azure, right? So, and then, Entra permissions management is also a critical solution because what it also helps provide is that cloud identity entitlements management, right? So EPM for short will allow an organization to be able to have visibility into their cloud identities and what permissions an identity has against all resources. So oftentimes these identities have more permissions that are needed, right? So EPM can identify when permissions have been used and provide a permissions creep index to these identities that have permissions that haven't been used in quite a while. You kind of touched on that earlier around permissions and just the right amount, just-in-time permissions and just the right amount of permissions, right? So being able to, organizations do not have a good view into the permissions across their, single cloud infrastructure. Needless to say, they're multi-cloud infrastructure because they've had to use multiple tools to be able to gain that visibility. So the Entra permissions management, again, provides that visibility across Azure, AWS, GCP, and are able to identify, permissions creep, who's over permission, which permissions have been used in the last, 6 months versus ones that have never been used, and then take remediated action against those and be able to deprovision access to resources if a user hasn't used those permissions ever or in the last 6 to 12 months, then they probably don't need those permissions any longer. So and Entra permissions management really provides that visibility into these other cloud environments and managing cloud identities and permissions creep, et cetera. So those are two key areas that complement multi-cloud, securing multi-cloud, in addition to Defender for Cloud, Azure Arc integration, the Defender for Endpoint, and permissions management. So
thanks, Brian. Yep. Thanks, Brian, Rob, and Nidu for covering a lot of these different capabilities and security controls that are provided by these various different products and securing the multi-cloud environment. One way that brings it all together is the MXDR solution. Rob, do you want to just talk a little bit about our MXDR solution, or TDR?
Of course I do. So what we talked a lot about in this webinar around the many various controls that Microsoft offers that could be used to secure your environment. But it's not just about implementing controls. These controls also provide valuable telemetry that with the right solution can help you to potentially detect and remediate threats to your environment through your multi-cloud infrastructure. Now, we have a solution that we call threat detection and response. And we have been working with Microsoft to get our solution verified as an MXDR solution offer. Now, we were very enthusiastic adopters of this program because the concept of extended detection and response has been around for a little while, but it's still relatively new in the market. And to be honest, there are so many different definitions of what extended detection and response means. This creates a lot of confusions for customers who are thinking that they're adopting one type of solution, but realizing that they're not getting all of the capability they thought they were getting when it was called extended detection and response. So what Microsoft has done is they have developed this program starting with how Microsoft defines extended detection response when it's applied to the Microsoft environment. Then what it is invited to do is its partners is to submit our solutions to this program and get them verified, and with as well as satisfy a number of other requirements. After doing so, we received this verified solution badge. And what that means is that gives that confidence to customers that if they adopt our solution, they will be getting an extended detection and response capability that is fit for purpose for the Microsoft environment.
Thanks, Rob. Now, Brian, I know you were heavily involved with our approval process and the solution here and helping us get this verified solution badge. Do you want to just talk a little bit about your experience or your thoughts on this recent change for us?
Sure. Yeah, super excited too. So the MXDR program that Microsoft has kind of built out is really kind of identifying what I refer to as the best of the best in Microsoft partners that offer a managed XDR solution that really is built on top of Microsoft security solutions, leveraging Microsoft Sentinel and the Microsoft Defender solutions. But PwC services kind of extend and include Defender for Cloud, which we talked about today, as well as Defender for IoT and OT, to provide that full visibility and management of threats across IT, OT, IoT environments, right? So now the opportunity exists, with PwC being a global organization, the opportunity now exists to provide a choice to these large enterprise customers, in the US market, but also customers with a true global presence that includes, maybe specific geographical requirements, whether it's data privacy, data sovereignty, or specific expertise in a region. So, what also makes PwC's solution so special is that they can provide a very comprehensive list of additional services on top of the managed XDR, things like digital risk protection, some of that we touched on, cyber technology rationalization, right? To Rob's point earlier about helping organizations reduce costs, threat hunting and threat response, which is critical to any sort of managed XDR solution and offer, as well as full incident response, to mention a few, right? So again, the program is about bringing the best of the best, as kind of defined by Microsoft, to our customers, putting them in this program that customers can get that confidence that these providers like PwC truly have a solution that is aligned with Microsoft's goals, but also meets customers' needs for today, right? We know that cybersecurity and the threats against organizations are They're hard to help. Organizations are struggling today to be able to defend themselves properly. So they're really needing a partner like PwC to be able to help with that, protection and really defend themselves against the advanced security threat. So again, we're just super excited to add PwC to the Microsoft Verified XDR program.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Rob. We really at PwC take our business-led strategies and take the technology-enabled solutions provided by Microsoft to provide the best experience for our customers. We encourage you, as part of this discussion, to reach out to us. Please contact us using the link below if you would like to reach out. If you have any questions at this time, I think we're going to open it up here for some Q&A and walk through some of the questions. I know Liz has been posting in the chat for Q&A. If you have any questions, go ahead and supply them, and we'll address them as they come in.
Thanks, Bill. I don't think we have any questions from the audience right now, but I know that we had a couple of questions that came in earlier, if you have those to bring up for the panel.
Yep. So jump in, whoever wants to go first. One of the questions that we had come in earlier was around talking about the cost versus value when moving to multi-cloud.
Yeah, I'll start out with that. So, and specifically when we think about that security around the multi-cloud. So, on the one hand, when you are adding, these multiple clouds to your environment, there will be some additional investment. You will need the tools to be able to give you that visibility, across your environments, to put in the right policies in place and enforce those policies, as well as make sure you have the proper governance in place as well. But the value you would get from that multi-cloud environment would well overwhelm any potential upfront investments, because it'll give you that agility, that flexibility. You'll get to benefit from the capability that goes across all those different multi-clouds. But I think the key is, particularly just to bring it to the security conversation, is to make sure that you are considering security upfront in your multi-cloud investments. The worst thing, but unfortunately the very common thing that many customers do, is they find themselves accidentally in the using multiple clouds, having not thought about what that security architecture needed to look like, and having to retrofit an architecture, a security architecture on your IT environment, rather than designing it up front, could actually be a lot more costly and a lot less efficient.
Thanks, Rob. I see another one coming in here. What are the top 3 good practices to secure your multi-cloud?
I can take that, and then please feel free to chime in, Brian and Rob. So I think Rob briefly touched on it, and we also talked about it. The first thing is, why multi-cloud for you? Why are you thinking about it? What are the benefits, and what do you plan to do, right? So that's the first thing. So essentially what I'm talking about is that a strategy. So you need to first think about, what is my overarching strategy when I think about multi-cloud? Why I'm adopting it? What is my vision associated with that? Is it cost driven? Is it business driven? Is it something else? Is it shift in business? So that's the first thing you need to establish. And then the second thing, as we touched and we talked about it a lot, is that how do you make sure that as you migrate or make this journey, you are still staying secure, you are still meeting all of your compliance requirements. So for that also, you'll have to think about the use of how you're planning to use these environments, what kind of risks you are going to introduce in these environments, and get the appropriate technologies and tools to help. And this is where, I think one thing we talked about, the earlier question was about cost. Now, a lot of the clients also think about okay, do I need to buy 3 sets of tools to manage this? This is where, which is a very unique and a very strong differentiator of Microsoft solution. And Brian covered on it, right? And trust permissions management. It will help you across all of the leading CSPs to manage IAM function. So those are also some long-term things you can think about. But you need to think about them a little early on, so that you don't leave a window of opportunity to somebody intentionally or unintentionally who's trying to cause you any reputational harm and take the data away from you, right? So those are I would say some of the things to keep in mind. Have a strategy, have why you want to do it, understand the usage of your environment, and invest in smart tools.
Thanks, Nadu. We have another question coming in here. So there's a question here around the threats to multi-cloud. Would someone like to speak a little bit about the threats? I think we touched on a little bit earlier in the discussion on some of the threats that we're faced, but anyone want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So, I think multi-cloud and cloud in general, there's a number of threats that kind of are specific to any cloud, cloud threats in general, right? So, they can be very targeted. I touched on one earlier around application security and being able to kind of protect against malicious web application, unauthorized access. And, with regards to kind of multi-cloud, and I think Nidhu kind of touched on this already, is really, one of the biggest threats is really just a lack of unified management across these multi-cloud environments, right? We know that threats exist because of vulnerabilities that might exist, but oftentimes it's the threats exist because of poor configuration. And poor configuration is a result of poor visibility into resources and security controls that either have or have not or minimally been set, right, to properly protect organizations, right? So, I think the multi-cloud threat is about being able to get good visibility into the workloads that are being leveraged and used, and then that ongoing assessment, because we know cloud environments are constantly changing, right? It's not a static environment. And so there's resources being added constantly, and being able to keep up with these resources and the configurations and those types of things, right? So that lack of visibility, missing vulnerabilities, or not being able to identify these weak points, or where vulnerabilities exist that threats can take advantage of, right? So in addition, lack of interoperability, right, is another, not having good cross-cloud visibility and the interoperability, being able to bring alerts from, say, AWS into a central, SIM solution, as an example, right? And having to, again, to Nidhu's point about having multiple security tools over on top of these different cloud CSPs, right? So, bringing everything together from a manageability, interoperability, and we really believe from a Microsoft perspective that, the tools that we put out there on the market from a Defender for Cloud perspective, Microsoft Sentinel, really do help bring the interoperability, the management, the integration with Azure Arc that I talked about earlier, to really help, reduce and mitigate these threats that do exist against these multi-cloud environments.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I mean, in general, all organizations are seeing an expanding threat landscape, even if they only had the one cloud. Cyber criminals and hackers are continuing becoming increasingly creative in terms of how they try to penetrate, IT environments. When you start adding and expanding the multiple clouds, that just makes that threat attack surface that much greater. So all of these tools and that Brian and Nidhu have been talking about, this need to have this very coherent security architecture across the 6 domains is the only way that our clients are going to be able to protect themselves. But by doing so, they will be able to take advantage of all the productivity and the flexibility that a multi-cloud environment will give them.
Thanks, Brian and Rob. There's certainly a lot of power in a single pane of glass in a multi-cloud environment to be able to see those threats and see the potential impact and provide that level of visibility that we were just discussing to mitigate and manage those threats. So looks like I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all speakers for walking us through how to secure multi-cloud environments. Appreciate everyone's time. Paulette, any other last-minute closing items?
Yeah, thank you, speakers. This is a great presentation and great content, and thank you everyone for attending. There's a short survey in the chat window to help us improve events like this in the future, and I hope everyone has a great day. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you for
Bye.
your time.